Good morning, everyone. I am Peter Vermeulen from Belgium. Don't try to pronounce my family name. And I'm very excited and honored to chair this session, the first session on vocation and employment. I think having a job is a very important thing for all of us. And most of us, I think, we do it, first of all, to have an income, obviously, but employment is more than just about an income. It's also about having the opportunity to meet people and especially to serve people in whatever job you have, and that creates meaning in life. So I think if we're talking about well-being at this conference, and that having the experience that your life is meaningful is a very important part of it. Okay, that's enough talking from me because we have three very interesting presentations this morning with very important topics. And what we'll do, each speaker will talk for almost 15 minutes, and then we have 1 or 2 minutes for 1 or 2 questions from the audience. There are microphones, I think, and people with microphones, so if you want to ask something, raise your hand and I'll pick out 1 or 2 of you, okay? And be very brief with your questions. The goal is not that you start talking for half an hour yourself, because we're on a limited time schedule, and a little bit autistic maybe, but a question is a question. Okay, so briefly introduce yourself in 1 line and put your question in a 2nd line, and that would work well. Okay, let's kick off. It's an honor to introduce you first to Claire O'Neill from University College, Cork, and she's a teacher. She's not only a teacher, but also a teacher educator. She's autistic herself, and what she will do is give a summary of what I think is a very interesting PhD research on the well-being experiences of autistic teachers in Ireland. Claire, please, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm delighted to be here this morning talking about my PhD research, which is nearly ready for submission. I know I only have 15 minutes, and when I was putting this presentation together, I was obviously very hungry, which isn't surprising, and brought in another one of my interests as well, which is the water and swimming. So I just want to kind of put a bit of context on the short talk I'll be giving right now. This is a huge topic, so I'm kind of jumping in at kind of a moment in the research. I won't be able to contextualize everything this morning. We have a very diverse audience here, which is brilliant, but it then does mean that when I'm talking, I know I'm not going to be making a lot of people happy or satisfied with what I'm saying, because hopefully people might say, I wish she said a bit more about this, or I wish she said a bit less about this, so she could have given more time to that. So what I would say is I have varied dissemination of my work. This is probably the most kind of formal kind of dissemination I'll be doing. So please do keep an eye out if you are interested. And you know, some of the dissemination, there won't even be any talking, which you might be very glad of after the 15 minutes. Also, please feel free to contact me if you, if you have a question about the work that isn't addressed today. So my research with autistic teachers was based around what looks like a very simple question. What are the well-being related experiences of autistic teachers in the context of the Irish education system? Now that's a bit of a doozy of a question because there's so many different components to that. Today, I'll be looking more at the research part of this rather than the policy and practice. But I suppose I'll back the work and say that there are very clear implications for policy and practice within the work. So I have just a smattering, a cúpla focal of Gaeilge throughout the talk, and in Irish, we have so many phrases that are well-being related. This is one that most children, when they're in school from a very early age, will be eye-rolling at it by the time we're 7 or 8. Is fearna na sláinte nar na táinte, which roughly translates to health is better than wealth. Or if you don't have your health, what's the point in having wealth? So, in terms of more background and context to this work is participatory, and it's work that is done with autistic teachers. I'm an autistic teacher myself, and I'm just so grateful, and I'm in a huge debt to my 10 participants. I suppose if this is deeply and very authentically participatory, I think this meme might be familiar to people. For so long, at the table, there has been so many experts, and the people who haven't been at the table are autistic people. So I really wanted all the participants to be very agentic in the work, and with that, and in order to kind of flatten that kind of research kind of binary, to disrupt that, I actually engaged in the research as a participant as well. When we're researching autism, and I think this is a message that's coming out very, very strongly throughout the conference, we definitely need new tools, and we need to look at the tools we're using to explore autism. And this phrase, talk back, comes from emancipatory disciplines. And when I say talk back, communicate back or push back at, these kind of deficit, kind of tragedy stories of autism. So part of the work was looking at the tools we use to research with autistic people, and what could we do to the tools that we have, maybe to repurpose them and not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but also, are there some new tools that we could be using to tell a really strong, powerful and agentic story about well-being experiences? The focus is very much with participants. This isn't just research by an autistic researcher. This is very much with, and it's certainly not research on autistic teachers. Another phrase that we have in Irish, Ahanin Kirog Kirogella, one beetle recognises another. It can often be used in not the most positive of ways, so I decided to lighten it a bit with a few Volkswagen Herbie beetles there. So it's kind of like birds of a feather flock together, and it's that idea that, rather than my lived experience as an autistic teacher who has struggled with her well-being at times in the profession, rather than that kind of creating bias, bias that will kind of negatively impact the research, I would suggest that my deep knowing of what it's like to be an autistic teacher and having to navigate a very privileged profession, but a very challenging profession with my well-being intact, and have moments of thriving and flourishing, it's no mean feat, and to have that deep knowing enhanced the research rather than kind of, impacted the research negatively with bias. So there was a focus on methods that would strongly show a deep understanding of and communicate to people the real experience of an autistic body-mind in the teaching profession. So I'm going to whiz through these. I might just throw them up there just for people to see, because it is a slight bit of repetition of the slide before, but they would be kind of the general aims and objectives that guided this, this research. And some of the images that are coming up would be images that are throughout the written thesis. So the thesis is actually quite untraditional in the sense that there's a lot of pictures. I don't know about you, I do love reading, but when you're reading something that's quite heavy and maybe challenging, I love a few pictures, so they're kind of there to keep me going, but hopefully keep the reader going as well. So the approach that was taken, and that's really kind of the focus today, The approach that was taken relied on a lot of different frames. I spent a lot of time looking at different frameworks. You know, I'm a teacher. I'm sure there's a few teachers in here. We tend to like frameworks. You know, there's a bit of solidity and a bit of security in a framework, but you don't want a framework to then kind of stymie or kind of constrict your creativity. So a lot of the research did look at various frameworks of well-being, you know, and what came out is that, like, a lot of kind of generic off-the-shelf well-being frameworks, yeah, you can adapt them, they can bring kind of a nice structure to the research, but we've actually lost a lot of frames that we had in the Irish context. So Celtic wisdom and Celtic philosophy actually really had a lot in terms of framing well-being. I suppose when I looked at well-being and I looked at Western and Eastern approaches and kind of everything kind of in between, our kind of indigenous and kind of authentic conceptualizations of well-being that we already had here in Ireland really grafted well onto the autistic experience, and that comes out very strongly in the work. So the next picture I have here is actually from the Hill of Tara, which would be kind of the centre of Ireland, and that stone is the Stone of Destiny, which would have been used as kind of a coronation stone for the High Kings of Ireland. So I'm doing my bit for Irish tourism here in the 15 minutes as well. So that's just to speak to the philosophical underpinnings of the study. I won't get into all the big words, I'll trip over them anyway, but like there is Celtic philosophy, there's Eastern philosophy, but then I didn't completely throw out kind of the old and classical tools that we have, the neurodiversity paradigm being a huge philosophical influence on the work as well. French philosopher Deleuze would have informed every stage of the research and really suited this type of work, because part of that philosophy is challenging kind of false binaries, looking at difference in a very different way sounds awful, but like looking at difference from a different perspective, and it just really suited the experiences that were coming from the participants. So the work was embodied. So what I mean by that, kind of in a nutshell, is we don't experience well-being with just our mind. We don't experience researching well-being with just our mind. This is a mind-body experience. I experienced this in a very embodied way as a researcher, which had implications for my well-being, and I had a duty of care for that as I was researching this during this. Creative methodologies were used, so went away a lot from text, and even though I did use interviews, the primary methodologies were creative. We used body mapping, and we used body mapping to explore our experiences of well-being within the system, and that meant that we didn't access our experiences primarily in a textual way. We would have done embodied exercises and then done life-size outlines of our body and expressed our experiences creatively. So body maps. We also used a lot of artifacts and used concrete objects to symbolize our well-being experiences within the system. And that was unexpectedly a really powerful part of the research, which there's no point in me. It's like kind of trying to teach media studies and not bringing in, I'm showing my age now, a newspaper into the classroom, you know. I'm not going to talk about it at length when I don't have the artifacts here with me. And then autoethnography was my big contribution as a participant to the research, but it was also really helpful in terms of reflexivity, researcher reflexivity, and triangulation of data as well. So to put it in the words of the participants, so it's not all what I'm saying, it was actually maybe not surprising, but it was very validating how helpful the participants found found the visual methodologies, the embodied methodologies, and what really struck me was that it was non-linear. So, you know, I don't know how many people here would have engaged in research as a participant in, say, a semi-structured interview. I have, and I'm really happy to do it. You're wrung out at the end of it, and it's very linear. When you're making a body map, if you're kind of like, okay, I'm finding this part really hard at the minute, you can go over to a part that you're going to be more comfortable with. When you go back to the harder part, you have those comforting experiences surrounding you and kind of enveloping you. It's a very different experience of sharing very vulnerable information. And I think it was Monique both yesterday said what a privilege it is to have this data and what a gift it is for people to give you that gift of their experiences. They're laying themselves open. I think it's in one of the quotes there. People are laying themselves open and bare with really painful personal experiences, and you know, you have to treat that like the treasure that it is. I suppose I better mention some of the outcomes. I think you get a sense that this isn't the type of research where there's going to be, you know, 5 actionable points by the end of it, where there's going to be bullet points and bang, bang, bang. This research has opened far many more questions than it has given answers, and I wouldn't see that as a limitation or a failing of the research. But if I was to share 3 outcomes or maybe findings, you know, somewhere between outcomes and findings, the approaches that we settled upon as a research group, they really worked, and that's very exciting, and I think there is huge implications there for future autism research. It was really, really important that there was copious examples of thriving and flourishing of autistic teachers within the system. And that's not to invalidate or to minimise any of the real challenges and barriers to wellbeing that are there currently, and probably some that will be there in time to come. But there was plenty of examples of thriving and flourishing. However, what came out strongly was that the supports, the external supports that are around, they need to change. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. I'm impressed by the creativity of your research project. So on a personal note, I also like that there are dogs in your presentation. Anyway, there's time for one question. Who wants to ask a question? Please raise your hand. Any question for Claire? There's a question over there.
Hello there. I'm autistic myself, and I'm a guard, a police officer in Ireland. So this is really interesting. The question is just simple, actually. How did you find your participants?
This time it would have been through social media, and I had more participants than what I needed, I think within an hour, 2 hours, very easily. When I did master's research in this, it was far more difficult because I needed a gatekeeper for the research. I wasn't allowed to recruit through social media, but here they gave me a little bit more leeway, and very easily, yeah.
Okay, thank you. If people have more questions for Claire, I think they can find you at the end of this session.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know how well I'll be with my words, but you know, if you get gobbledygook out of me, please contact me by email. I think it's on the conference details, and you might get a more coherent response. But I'll give it a try afterwards anyway. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much, Claire,
Peter,
for an excellent presentation.
You.